Hey everyone, welcome to our last two modes to talk about in documentaries. We have the observational and participatory. And I grouped these two together because they are similar yet opposite. I think these two are the ones that arguably, maybe not so much observational, but participatory, you see the most, and you see these influences both the most in modern documentary and in other media as well. I think even TikTok, things like that, you kind of start to see the birth of some of the aesthetics kind of piping through these two documentary styles. So, just as a quick refresher, we're talking about these modes, which are, in my mind, they're a little bit different than genre because they can overlap in different ways. Whereas you can have a sci-fi film with comedic moments, it doesn't mean it's necessarily, a sci-fi comedy. I think with documentary, these classifications were sort of put together by Bill Nichols so that there is some kind of structure and organization when talking about them, because there are different types of documentaries, but the bleed over from one to another, I think, is more undefinable and a little bit more fluid, as it were, between them. And I think that's what kind of makes studying these so interesting. And we've already talked about the poetic, documentary, reflexive, expository, and the performative. So, poetic, as you'll remember, kind of what they sound like. They're more in the what might traditionally be called experimental avant-garde. They evoke a mood. They are kind of a little bit more. I'm trying to think of the term like musical. They're a little bit more expressive. Oh, I have expressive right there. Time and space can be manipulated in different ways. There's tone, there's a lot of texture, there's line, there's shape. There's an emphasis on, I think, the cinematography combined with a soundtrack that kind of helps move it. If you'll remember, we watched Samsara with it, and very unique style of documentary. Kind of gets a little bit combination of travelogue and different things that are kind of blended in there with it. We have reflexive, concerned with showing the process of filmmaking, connecting the viewer with the world of the filmmaking process. It deconstructs that traditional hidden style of Hollywood. We have the Brechtian sort of influences in it. So we're influenced Brechtian, I should say. And we watched the very popular Man with a Movie Camera. We talked about expository. These are a little bit like the thesis documentaries, where there's a specific topic, well researched, a proof or argument is presented in a very straightforward way. These are what we think of when we think of kind of the 1970s BBC style documentary. They're not after emotion, they're not after anything, provoking anything from the audience other than this is fact. It sometimes will have that godlike narrative, Morgan Freeman voice in March of the Penguins with it as well. We have performative. I think of Super Size Me, where the filmmaker and the subject are so intricately woven, and they immerse themselves in the world of a subject. We see a little bit of the participatory, and this is where I say there's a little bit of fluidity between them. So performative is definitely kind of going to the extreme where the filmmaker being in this world is sort of the point. Icarus, another one about competitive biking and doping that goes along with it. So where the filmmaker is really immersed in the subject. So the observational and the participatory. In the 1960s and 70s, technology changed cameras. right? They became smaller. They became easier to use. 16 millimeter became a lot more frequently used with documentaries. It's kind of got that. I've always, when I was in film school, we talked about it as that. When I shot a documentary, I said I want that 16 millimeter look where they shoot in 16 millimeter and it's kind of blown up, so you get that little bit of film grain in there, but it's still got the filmic look to it. So we had that change where cameras were could be a little bit easier to move around, more mobile, smaller, so you can get into places easier without disrupting a subject. And we had ways were created for syncing sound in a much more efficient, economical way that didn't involve needing to be on a gigantic set. So that then changed the environment of what could be filmed for the documentary. Faster lenses were also coming out that were in the realm of affordability, as it were, for low light situations. So you didn't need to necessarily set up lighting rigs everywhere you went. So that kind of spawned the technology often breeds and the innovation. And I think that was, in this case, a lot that happened. It did for the film world in general, but I think documentaries really started to evolve at this point. So wanted to just kind of briefly talk about the three types of documentaries, where this professor will kind of touch upon them and the difference between the older documentaries and new.
How has documentary filmmaking evolved? You look at something like Grey Gardens, which was beautiful in its own right, but then you see something like Searching for Sugar Man, and it seems like filmmaking nowadays is so much faster. The editing is just quicker. How have we changed as an audience so that filmmaking is what it is in terms of this fast cutting?
Well, it reflects the same kind of attention span that all forms of filmmaking, commercial making, television, all of that has become faster. So Grey Gardens is going to look slow. So yes, everything is faster. If you look at Grey Gardens, it is of a different era, and it's also cinema verite, which is supposedly like a fly-on-the-wall style of filmmaking. Some would argue that you're never a fly on the wall. The minute you have a cameraman in a room, you're influencing the events. But we talk about different styles of documentaries in the class, and cinema verite is certainly one of the earlier forms of documentary filmmaking where you're just observing an event. Searching for Sugar Man is something much more constructed, or you're adding visual and oral textures to it. You're using music in a very dramatic way. You're using sound effects in a very dramatic way. Graphics, animation. Errol Morris does the same thing with his montage.
How has documentary filmmaking evolved?
All right, observational documentaries. The very objective way of documenting. It's kind of what it sounds like. It is going in with the camera and observing, not influencing. And that becomes a hotly contested word, that influencing. But for sake of understanding this mode, we're going in, we're observing, we're shooting, we're not influencing anything. The filmmaker is as far removed as possible from the process of capturing. That is to say, they're not staging anything. They're not engaging with the subject. They are a fly on the way. I apologize. That should be fly on the wall. Fly on the way. Fly on the wall. Don't look at that way. Wall. Observational. All right, so this is exactly what it sounds like. This is a very objective way of documenting. This is where the filmmaker is observing the action, not influencing the action. Showing up with a camera and recording what's there, recording what you see. The filmmaker is, or tries to be, as far removed as possible from the process of capturing. That is to say, You'll hear this a lot, especially in movies where documentary is being made or something like that. So a TV show about a documentary crew, and they always say the same thing: pretend we're not here. So they always say. But for those of you who've ever been on a set, can you really ever pretend like a camera isn't there? Probably not. Even if you know somebody's recording on their phone, something just kind of happens to you where you know, hey, I'm being filmed. But that being that, this is a very distinct style of documentary, and the intent behind it is that it is there just to capture the action and not engage with the subject. So it's this fly on the wall style of documenting, sometimes referred to as direct cinema. So those lighter cameras allow for more handheld shots. I don't know what it is about handheld shots that make us feel like we're there. I don't know if it's mimicking kind of the eye moving around, things being a little bit more frantic, that it sort of is standing in the place of our own, the tripod of our body and the camera as our eye, and we're just there observing, panning, tilting, everything like that. Because even now, I think that's why things like TikTok, on these cruddy camera phones, and we buy them as real. We accept that they're real. There's kind of a realness to it, even though it's not shot on anything great. And I think it comes from these lighter cameras and this start of documentaries in the 60s and 70s. I think also back to the influential, now this isn't a documentary, but it was documented and it was profound. And that was Rodney King, when he was being just tore into by the LAPD back in the 90s. I remember as a kid seeing that. Something about it being handheld made it more real, made everything, and everybody in the world was talking about it. There was a realness to it. That really couldn't be explained. It was documenting reality. So I think these observational documentaries have that power. There's a strength behind them being shot in the way that they are. And certainly these lighter cameras that can zoom in, zoom out, they have that longer focal length. They can get you closer to the action in limited light. In these observational documentaries, or the observational mode, we see a lot longer takes as well too. There was a film theorist named Andre Bazin, who was kind of involved with a lot of the French New Wave, and he was very into realism. And he just basically, wanted the camera, you hit record and just let it kind of play out. These nice long takes give a sense of reality to it. With the observational, there's limitations on the filmmaker. You don't often see, they're avoided any kind of reenactment. And there is limitation on voiceover. I found this really good quote from Masterclass. Now, I've used Masterclass before. I love it. But where the poetic mode is avant-garde and the expository mode is didactic, the observational mode lives in the middle ground, telling concrete stories about real people, but eschewing moralizing narratives. So again, it's letting the truth come out from the observation. Let the subject present the truth rather than create the truth or construct the truth through those forms of filmmaking. All right, so whereas in observational is I'm a fly on the wall, I'm just here, we have participatory. The filmmaker participates in the process. We see similarities about the observing of the world, and where in Observational, the world is revealing the truth about itself, and the filmmaker is remaining objective. The participatory documentary has more of a subjective approach, as you know, the filmmaker is in the world and the filmmaker is questioning the subjects. It's similar shooting styles to the Observational. The filmmaker will speak or interview either on or off camera, and we tend to align ourselves through the point of view of the filmmaker. If any of you have ever seen the mockumentary, This is Spinal Tap, they start out with the filmmaker talking about what the film is about, that he's participating by going and following this band. Okay, that's exactly kind of what it is, and then we kind of align with that filmmaker's point of view because we trust that they're going to try and remain objective. So sometimes this is referred to as cinema verite. I apologize for their not being accent marks there. I think very much of somebody like Michael Moore. Now, I think could easily fall more into the performative mode, but there's certainly a participatory element to it. This movie, Bowling for Columbine, that he did, I've only seen once, and it comes from the fact that I grew up in Littleton. I was supposed to go to Columbine. I would have been a freshman. And so I have a pretty raw nerve when it comes to things Columbine. But it was an impactful movie, and this kind of shows that interaction between the filmmaker and the subject. So this was an interesting interview.
But who was to blame? All the experts had an answer.
Angry, heavy metal subculture.
Where were the parents?
Violent movies.
South Park.
Video games.
Television.
Entertainment.
Satan.
Cartoons.
Doom. Society.
Toy guns. Drugs.
Shock rocker. Marilyn Manson.
Marilyn Manson.
Marilyn Manson.
Marilyn Manson.
Marilyn Manson.
Marilyn Manson has canceled the last 5 dates of his U.S. tour out of respect for those lost in Littleton. But the singer says artists like himself are not the ones to blame.
This is perhaps the sickest group ever promoted by a mainstream record company.
After Columbine, it seemed that the entire focus on why the shootings occurred was because the killers listened to Marilyn Manson. 2 years after Columbine, Manson finally returned to Denver.
The Ozfest at Mile High Stadium brings shock rocker Marilyn Manson to Denver tomorrow.
There were protests from the religious right. But I thought I'd go and talk with him myself.
When I was a kid growing up, music was the escape. That's the only thing that had no judgments. You know, you put on a record and it's not going to yell at you for dressing the way you do. It's going to make you feel better about it.
Mm-hmm. Some will be so brash to ask if we believe that all who hear Manson tomorrow night will go out and commit violent acts. The answer is no. But does everybody who watches a Lexus ad go and buy a Lexus? No, but a few do.
I definitely can see why they would pick me, because I think it's easy to throw my face on a TV because I'm, in the end, sort of a poster boy for fear. Because I represent what everyone's afraid of, because I do and say what I want.
If Marilyn Manson can walk into our town and promote hate, violence, suicide, death, drug use, and Columbine-like behavior, I can say, not without a fight you can't.
The two byproducts of that whole tragedy were violence and entertainment and gun control. And how perfect that was the two things that we were going to talk about with the upcoming election. And also then we forgot about Monica Lewinsky, and we forgot about the president was shooting bombs overseas, yet I'm a bad guy because I've sang some rock and roll songs. And who's a bigger influence, the president or Marilyn Manson?
Do you know,
I'd like to think me, but I'm going to go with the president.
Do you know that the day that Columbine happened, the United States dropped more bombs on Kosovo than any other time during that war?
I do know that, and I think that that's really ironic, you know, that Nobody said, well, maybe the president had an influence on this violent behavior. No, because that's not the way the media wants to take it and spin and turn it into fear, because then you're watching television, you're watching the news, you're being pumped full of fear. There's floods, there's AIDS, there's murder. Cut to commercial. Buy the Acura, buy the Colgate. If you have bad breath, they're not going to talk to you. If you got pimples, the girl's not going to fuck you. And it's just it's a campaign of fear and consumption. And that's what I think that it's all based on, is the whole idea that keep everyone afraid and they'll consume. Mm-hmm. And that's really as simple as it can be boiled down to.
Right. If you were to talk directly to the kids at Columbine or the people in that community, what would you say to them if they were here right now?
I wouldn't say a single word to them. I would listen to what they have to say, and that's what no one did.
Okay, so pretty interesting in how the filmmaker participates with the subject. There's also, I think you can kind of tell through the edit and things like that. Michael Moore's documentaries are really a lot more than the presentation of fact. There's an entertainment, there's a humor to them. I've looked for the documentary Roger and Me, his very first one, and the man has a delicious sense of humor. And I feel like that film is the least, how do I want to put this? Kind of politically motivated. It was what it was, even though he's involved. It was about car manufacturer closing a plant in Flint, Michigan, where he was from, and he's kind of seeing the impact of what that did to the town. And I think as he's kind of gone on and on with his film, he is the film. Now it's become a lot more performative, where he's the subject, he's dictating how you feel at any given moment. So that is what I have for those two modes, the observational, the participatory. I'm going to do a breakdown of the module that you'll be going into with this. I wanted to touch on Man with the Movie Camera really quickly, because in a roundabout way, you sort of proved their point in making of the film, and that is to get away from Hollywood sensibilities when it comes to filmmaking, because there was a very strong reaction against the film itself, as opposed to embracing what other forms of filmmaking might be out there, or documentary making, I should say. It was a sense of, I don't get it, therefore it's not good. And I get that. I remember watching a movie called Stalker in grad school. It's really long. I think it's over 3 hours long. It's Russian. It's very slow. It is remarkably slow. And there were a group of us who would get together to watch the assigned films. And we just didn't get it. We were like looking up online, like, what's going on? I really don't get it. I don't know. And therefore we lost out on just simply being present to it. And I know most of you are seniors. Studying film is like going to a museum. That is to say, in a museum, you're going to see different wings. You're going to see classical painting. You're going to see abstract painting. You're going to see Cubism. You're going to see Renaissance. You're going to see all sorts of stuff. Not all of it's going to make sense. Not all of it you have to like. Not all of it you have to appreciate. Not all of it you have to understand. But what I learned from Stalker was that I don't let the fact that I am not understanding this stand in the way of my telling myself it's okay not to understand it. Absorb what you can. When you're not understanding a film, you can go one of two ways. You can get frustrated by it. You could say, well, it's not good because I don't understand it. And, you know, part of that, I'll even take credit for it. It's up to me to make it understandable to you. So I could explain reflexive documentaries better. Is one argument that can be made for it. Sure. But that doesn't. I can explain something as well as I possibly can. You can read all the books you want on something, and still not get it, still not understand it. But don't let your not understanding something, get in the way of being present for art and for. I think you have to dial up your academic brain even more so in those situations, because I think when we're face to face with a screen and what's flickering there is not making sense, then we have to look even closer. And we have to look beyond our own knowledge and understanding to just say, I'm going to retain what I am seeing. And I'm going to go look up what it is I am seeing. And I'm going to have to self-study what I am seeing. So I included that video essay with it just to help kind of put it in perspective, because I get it. It's not, the whole point it was made was to counter Hollywood-style filmmaking. The other thing you got to remember, too, on certain films is that one is 100 years old. The sensibilities of people 100 years ago are different than they are now. And I'm not blaming anybody. I'm not even saying anything. I'm sharing with you what I went through, because I saw a lot of what you were saying in what I remember in graduate school. And accept the fact there's going to be some that you see that you don't like, because that is not the point of studying film, to watch only what you like. Part of it is to familiarize yourself with what's out there, especially if you go on to graduate school. You want to have a little bit of depth in what films are out there, what are touchstone type films that most graduate programs are going to want you to have seen, but just really say to yourself in those moments, I don't get this, but I'm going to try to retain what it is I'm seeing so that I can maybe come to understand it. There are some that are out there I'll never understand no matter how much I've studied, and that's fine. Once you've gone to the limit, but don't discount studying something because it doesn't make sense. That's completely different than say I turned off the new Halloween movie because it wasn't that I didn't get it, it's because I didn't like it for many different reasons. But they're never going to sit there and say this is one of the greatest films ever made. They will continue to talk about man with a movie camera in the next 100 years. It'll be part of every filmmaking class from now until we are all gone from this world. So it'll be that way with Stalker too. And you have to allow yourself that freedom to say, I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't like it. But I'm going to ratchet up my brain to just soak in what I'm seeing so that maybe after I research this, oh, okay, now it's becoming clear. Again, much like going into a museum, walk through every wing, see what's there. Do that with film and do that with documentaries. You all have been such a joy. I hope you enjoyed this. I will make another video going over your module. All right. Take care, everyone.